astrology, the sun and moon represent the masculine and feminine principles, while Aries and Libra represent the axis of relationships. Tune in when Chris Flisher and his Aries sun go head-to-head with Deborah Clement and her Libra moon about a subject near and dear to everyone's heart. Relationships. Will the ram run roughshod over a weltering Libra moon, or will the moon's sweet powers of persuasion stop the Aries beast in his tracks? To find out, tune in to a very special presentation of He Says, She Says Astrology with Chris Flisher and Deborah Clement.
Hello, I'm Chris Flisher.
And I'm Deborah Ann Clement.
And we are
back
with He Says,
She Says Astrology.
Well, it's been a long time. We've been on a hiatus for quite some time, but we're finally back. We've revived our old platform of the male and the female discussing astrology and the wonders of the world.
And the wonders of the universe.
The wonders of the universe. So we're going to talk about He Says, She Says Astrology. I'm an Aries sun. Deborah's a Capricorn sun. I'm a Cancer moon. She's a Libra moon. We have all the chemistry, and we both have Mercury as our ruling sign of our ascendants. So we love to talk, and we're going to talk about astrology. It's a new show.
And speaking of the ascendant, we're starting with the first house. We're going to be talking about the ascendant.
What could be better? Best place to start. I mean, it really does set the stage for the whole entire chart, which is why the birth time is so important. We always request that birth time.
It's critical. It really is. And the ascendant, as you say, it sets the tone for the entire chart. And it's also because the first house is opposite the seventh house. It's very important in terms of how a person relates to the rest of the world, besides, of course, to the partners. And, of course, the relationship with oneself.
Yeah. And this, we initially, when we did this show years ago, we were talking about the idea of relationships. And relationships, we passing this idea back and forth over the last couple months here. Relationships really are in every part of our lives. We have a relationship with our boss, a relationship with our children, a relationship with our workers. So relationship is a very broad term. And so we're going to be addressing it through those lenses, rather.
It's true. And not to forget, we even have a relationship with money.
Yeah,
Some of us have a better relationship with it than others, but
I'm still struggling with that one. Money and I don't get along very well. I mean, I like money. It doesn't like me, apparently. So
I think I was just going to say, no, I think it likes you just fine. You circulate it. When you get it, that's Aries. You got it, you spend it.
Oh, that's what it is. I was wondering what it was, because it always seems to leave me. I was wondering why it always left me so quickly. So, but anyway, the ascendant is critical. You know, I've always held the contention. Years ago, I spoke with a woman named Jean Avery, who wrote a whole book on the rising sign. And her great way of describing it was, it's sort of the costume we wear, what the people in the rest of the world see us as. I always thought that was a great visual.
You know, I always think of the ascendant because, again, you mentioned the mask that we wear, but it's that first impression. And I like to think of it like this. You know, I'm at a party and I'm sitting, on the couch, and you walk through the door and I get that first impression of you as you walk in. And the truth is, when I get to sit and know you, you may actually be very much, as you appeared when you walked in, but sometimes you're not. And we've all had that where somebody walks in and, quite frankly, you might think to yourself, boy, they're kind of unapproachable or snooty or something. And then you get to speak to them and they're nothing like that at all. Mm. And again, it's what that ascendant in that first house is projected.
Yeah, because, if you think of it, and sort of the analogy I've sort of teased out of it going over the years is that if you were to go and see somebody and they were in a uniform and they were a police officer or a fireman in a uniform, you'd immediately know what they were. If you saw somebody in scrubs at a hospital, you'd know that they were either a nurse or a surgeon. That is sort of what the ascendant is to you. You sort of have this projected sort of aura that you give out to the world that people say, that person may be a Gemini, but they've got a Capricorn rising, and they're just going to be a different kind of a flavor there.
Absolutely. Because what do we always say, right? It takes in the entire chart.
It does take in the entire chart. And what's important about the ascendant, I think, is that without it, you really can't get the orientation. You can know where the planets are and what signs they're in, but you don't get the orientation of the houses, which is where we find the action unveiling.
It's where we find the action. It's where we find the talents. And quite frankly, it's where we find, the struggles at times.
Oh, yeah. We know about the struggles. There's tons of those. And, as a brief side note about struggle, there's no astrology chart I've ever seen that doesn't have struggle in it. But that is what the lesson of the chart provides for us. It provides us that sort of that pathway to success. It's not always going to be easy, but it's there. The challenges are there, but the challenges are how you grow.
Yeah, and the other thing too is interesting when you look at charts because in terms of aspects, the squares, right? The squares we consider they're challenging, they're testing. But the truth is, if you have a chart and there are no squares, the person doesn't accomplish that much generally because really what motivates us? It motivates us to overcome things, or our ambition is wanting something else because we're not satisfied, with where we are at the moment. So it comes to that motivation, those squares and that challenge and that at times that struggle, besides being, we could say life lessons, but it really is just, it's necessary, as you said, to growth.
Yeah, and I think that the geometric construct of the 90-degree angle, which forms the square, is indicative of what it's like on a stair. If you're climbing, think of it as climbing stairs. All the stairs in your house or wherever you go to work are a 90-degree angle. As you take those steps up, it's work to get up those stairs, but that's what the challenge is. That's sort of a good illustration when you think about the idea of what a square is.
No, and think about it. If all you ever do, if you never go up those stairs and never exert yourself and just always, I don't know, go up and down the elevator, in an extreme case, right, that can have a negative impact on your health, on your well-being if you really, right, don't get that body going.
But what I've always been fascinated with is the relationship of the first house or the ascendant in a, say, a friendship or in a romantic relationship or even in a work relationship or any sort of relationship that we're talking about, is the symbiotic relationship between at least the elementals of what the element is with the person that you're meeting with. So say, for example, I'm a Virgo. I got Virgo rising. I do well with Tauruses and Capricorns because they recognize an earthly quality in me. That if my rising sign matches up with the sun or the moon of somebody else who's in a similar sign, a lot of my best friends, believe it or not, are Virgos because they recognize that Virgo quality in me.
Well, likewise, I was going to say I'm Gemini rising. And I get along very well with air signs, the Aquarians, the Libras. And, the thing or two about the relationship with a rising sign is that, when you think about it, because you meet somebody, and this is what I want to say to you about, you've got that Virgo rising. And so very often that is a little bit of a mask. Then someone gets to know you. And really, let's be honest, Chris, all that Aries energy is certainly there to be seen. So in some ways, quite frankly, that Virgo energy is very helpful because it can keep that ram from, maybe kind of looking and being a little bit more cautious and, seeing that line and not going off that cliff.
Are you saying I'm impulsive?
No, you said that. But I agree with you.
As a matter of fact, I did. But I thought you were implying that perhaps as an Aries ram, I might be a little, impulsive and jump off the cliff a little bit too quickly, which is probably true. I have in the past. Although, here's another thing I want to bring up, though, is that I also believe that we actually grow into our rising sign. So I may have, when I was 7 years old, I may have been more of an Aries, but as I get older, I become more and more and more like a Virgo. And the reason I think that's true is because think about it. That old expression, you're comfortable in your skin, he's comfortable in his skin, or she's comfortable in his skin. That is what happens. As you get older and more confident about who you are, you grow into being comfortable in your own skin. That is growing into your rising sign.
So I'm going to say that I think as children, certainly speaking for myself, I feel as children, we are operating from our moon, much more from our instincts and our emotions. And I do feel that as we get into our teens or those rebellious years, we're growing into the sun. So I do feel sort of goes in that progression. And then finally getting into the ascendant, I'm going to agree with you on that.
Wow.
I don't know that I would have. I have to be honest, 5 years ago, I don't know that I would have, but certainly I have to say as I've gotten, a teeny bit older, the Gemini rising, that flexibility, being more, I'm going to say more adaptable in that sense. Yeah, I think I've sort of chilled out a little bit in some ways and mellowed. And I think that's very much of the Gemini ascendant, wanting to have a little bit more fun than this very much of this Capricorn of got to get it done. And what's the next, mountain to climb?
Well, there's a certain lightness to the Gemini ascendant. I think the Gemini has a certain, I have some ideas about the Gemini ascendant. There's that duality to it. There's that spark of intellectual curiosity. There's that ability to talk. There's the ability to converse, very loquacious kind of person, I would say. And I think I can say that safely because I have the same characteristics.
That Virgo rising, absolutely. It's ruled by Mercury. Though I do think, and this is interesting because you have just as Venus rules Taurus and Libra, right? And Mercury rules Virgo and Gemini. So you've got the same planet ruling two signs, but they come across very differently. Mm-hmm. Whereas Virgo rising, viewing a person with Virgo rising, and personally, I feel that people with Virgo rising, they're very observant. They don't miss a trick. And they can be at times, I do find, they can be a little bit critical, not so much that they're being mean, but they just see everything. Whereas Gemini can be a little bit restless, a little bit distracted. Gemini rising can be underestimated. I can sail at the Brooklyn Bridge. Virgo rising, Mercury is much more focused, when it's in Virgo than when it's in Gemini.
Well, I think it's more flighty. I would say that. I think there's a certain duality that goes on there, flip-flopping, kind of, not necessarily in a bad way. It's a very quick thinking sign. I love that about the Gemini rising. It's got that rapid fire sense of humor, oftentimes good with the rejoinders. I'll always love that quality.
It's also good. I will say negatively, Gemini can be a little bit sort of irresponsible in terms of blowing off commitments. Okay. I'm supposed to do that. Yeah, it's okay. Something else came up. And, I joke about this and say, oh, it's such a gift. But I feel as a rising sign, Gemini can come up with an excuse. It's great, for anything on the spot. It's like, it's just got this great, call it an imagination. And so that, it's all there. It's all there. But the fact that you say Virgos is critical, I'm not quite sure about that. I'm going to criticize you about that. Well, I think it's maybe here. I'm going to use this word.
I know exactly what you mean.
It's judgment in a way. If you use the word judgmental, that sounds doesn't sound very nice either. But the point is, there's a reason for it. There's a purpose for it, because we need Virgo. We need that attention to detail. We need that sign to look and say, hey, if you don't fix that, the whole thing's going to collapse.
Yeah, but one of the problems with that though is that they sometimes get wound up in the minutia. And they can get tracked, and so they're very worried about the little tiny details, and they're missing the big picture sometimes. But this is all part of what the first house and the ascendant and the first house are essentially the same thing. The ascendant is the line of time that delineates when you were first born, which is why the birth time is so important. And then you go on from there. And in that first house, that is basically your raw inner self. And that's what like you said, you foster that as you grow older. And I think your analogy of the moon and the child is perfect. And I think the sun in the rebellious period, it certainly maps well to my own personal life and how I got to where I was. I was very much rebellious in my middle life, kind of a long-haired hippie. But that certainly plays in with that very well.
And we're talking about Gemini and Virgo, but in fairness, and I do want to say, like, for Aries rising, because people of Aries rising, in terms of, I'm going to say, the approach to life, because that's part of the ascendant as well, there is that, they're go-getters. There's a lot of initiation. There's a lot of leadership. They can be very good at promoting their own interests. Yeah. And they can be very successful for it because they'll go out and go after what they want.
Yeah, it really is embodied. When the rising sign is in a sign, it really does see the physical manifestation of that sign itself. So all the qualities you would associate with any sign really do come out in a display through that through the sign that you're mentioning. So let's do that. We talked about Aries as a rising sign. We know what that's like. I've got a friend who's an Aries. He's a salesman. He's a go-getter. He doesn't always finish his projects, which is typical Aries quality as well. When we move into Taurus, we see something totally different there. We see a much different person.
Totally different energy, totally different. But what I do find about Taurus rising and people with Taurus rising is very often they have good taste. And when I say good taste, even if they know quality. Yeah. You can't pass off, don't pass off a knockoff, they'll spot it right away. But they do. They appreciate, and it's not just good food, all right, but it's also all about the senses, the way things feel, the way things, the aromas. And they can be they hold their ground. I think that's a nice way of putting it. I'm going to say they can really certainly hold their ground.
Yeah, you're not going to win too many arguments. And if you do, it's going to be very reluctantly. But how you might win an argument is by buying them a box of chocolates or a nice expensive bottle of wine. You're right about the Tauruses. These are the people who go out and buy the 200 thread count sheets for their beds. These are the people who buy the wonderful perfumes, who love to have their hair done. This is a very Taurus kind of quality. You see that in the rising sign. So if you see somebody well-dressed and having all those qualities, that's a good way of telling that's the person.
Absolutely. And they spend it. And it's interesting because they can be kind of conservative with money. And that's why I say it's more like an investment, but they actually enjoy it. So when they're sleeping in those sheets, they love the feel of those sheets or the feel of the material. So that gives them a lot of pleasure. Luxury
is where it's at. And they often get a bad rap for being, a little bit too self-indulgent, I guess, and pampering themselves. But hey, somebody's got to do it.
Listen, if they can afford it, and they usually can, quite frankly, I think it's a beautiful thing. It keeps them happy.
It is a beautiful thing. I'll tell you, I was in a relationship with a Taurus one time, and all those things that we mentioned were so clear. We had to go to the best restaurants, we had to order the best meals and the best bottles of wine, and it was an expensive relationship on my part.
That's why your money didn't stay. You see, there's one of the reasons why your money doesn't stay. Yeah. But I will tell you about just Taurus in general, going back over my life. And I always say one fellow in particular, the person, no one ever took me out as beautifully as this one guy. And he was a Taurus. And the restaurants, flowers, perfume, unfortunately,
it's the best of all the creature comforts, is what I would say.
Absolutely, it wasn't for me, but he holds a very special place in my heart because I was like, oh my God! But he enjoyed it, and that was the point. It wasn't done for show or to try to win me over. It's just he himself enjoyed these things.
And by being a fixed sign, there's not going to settle for anything else. They want what they want. They get what they get. And they get what they want.
Yes.
So we talked about Gemini. So we already know that the Geminis, we have this. There's a certain very. I think of them as the social butterflies in a way, because they're very active and talking with people. They sort of enter the room with this splash, and they've got. They can carry on multiple conversations and do multiple tasks. True for the Gemini rising sign or the sun or the moon. You find this the same way.
I find there's a restlessness.
Yeah.
If you're on the beach and there's somebody who's on the next blanket and they keep turning over and they keep moving and they keep. Gemini is usually isn't usually in the chart, but there's a restlessness, and they can lose interest. They can get a lot of ideas, a lot of projects. Stick with them a little bit, and then they get distracted and go on to something else. So a lot of times, I'm going to say Gemini as the sun, as the moon, or I'm going to say as the rising, execution can be an issue for them.
Yeah, but they're incredibly valuable when it comes to communicating. Great writers, great communicators. You see, if you've got to have that quickness, especially like a comedian would need that quick rejoinder to come through. That's an interesting spot.
Served me well in court.
Yeah,
served me well in law.
There you go. Perfect example. It's a perfect example where you have to have the ability to converse and to get that across. When we move into the Cancer rising sign.
Cancer is an interesting rising sign because very often it tends individuals with Cancer rising sometimes it's a cardinal sign, which is a leadership sign. But Cancer rising can be a little bit shy or a little bit of a reluctant leader is the way that I would put that. I seem to see that quite often.
Well, they're a behind the scenes sort of initiator. I think that they're more inclined to avoid the spotlight, like you say. And of course, you think about this is the best way to think of a Cancer or a Cancer rising is think of the crab being backed in the corner in the ocean floor with somebody attacking him. And he's way back in the corner with his claws out, clamping away to push people away. There's that sort of protectiveness, but there's also that strong maternal quality so you find, I had a teacher when I was a kid who I absolutely loved, and she was a Cancer rising. I know this because I found that out after the fact. And she just had this great warmth about her, made me feel very comfortable. That's that real strong maternal quality.
There is a maternal quality there, and I would say a nurturer, a caretaker. Yeah, absolutely.
Love that. Yeah. When we think of the next sign, we know we can think of nothing else, but when you see a Leo rising walk in the room, you know it. Nobody else is taking up the oxygen like that.
There's a presence. There's a definite presence when they walk in the room. It's the way they carry themselves, really. They come in there, and I'm not going to say, do they walk in like a king or a queen? Quite frankly, very often they do. It's a commanding sign, and they do have very much, like I say, a lot of a very commanding presence, and they just generally do enjoy the spotlight, even if the rest of the chart is not a very, let's say, extroverted or look at me sign. Still, there is that energy that it's just, here I am.
Yep. And I've seen it more with Leo rising than I do with Leo suns, because I know some Leo suns that are not exactly necessarily charismatic or flamboyant. They're a little more subdued, probably because of the other aspects in their chart. But I think with the Leo rising, you definitely see that charisma, that flamboyance, that here I am. And they're loud sometimes because they roar. I mean, they come in just like the lion, Leo the lion.
And I also feel because, it's the fifth house ruler. It's the house of fun.
House of fun and creativity.
And Leo knows how to have fun.
Yeah, they sure do. It's fascinating. We've already talked about Virgo, but we can go on a little further. I can speak as an authority on this. There is a quality of sort of this minutia driven kind of neatness and order. Now, I'm the kind of guy, I raised 3 children by myself. I would walk in the house after work with my coat on still, and if the counters were dirty, I would start scrubbing those counters before I even put my bag down from work, and my coat is still on. That's how that's a good sign of it. That's sort of that minutia kind of nitpicky kind of Virgo quality that wants that neatness and order, and that can be varied by the person. But that's what's my particular, weirdness.
Are you still like that? Because I have a kitchen. I can use some help here.
I am still like that, but it has to be my kitchen. I'm not that worried about yours.
Oh, well, I will tell you, my brother has Virgo rising, and I'm going to say the same thing, because when he comes into my kitchen, it's like, oh, there's a dish in the sink, or, yeah. Capricorn isn't the most domestic sign. And the other thing, though, I do want to say about Virgo rising, a very positive trait, because Virgo shows up. You need help. You don't have to ask for help. As a sign in the moon and also as a rising sign, you're there to help. You roll up your sleeves. You're not afraid of hard work. And it's a very loyal friend. It's a very loyal sign.
Yeah, and it's all about service, really. It's a key word for the Virgo rising sign and the Virgo first house is that sense of service, the desire to help others. And you'll often find your dental hygienists and your nurses and doctors and stuff like that will be often in that kind of a field. You'll often find that there. So
it's true. Those fields where you can have a high degree of, I'm going to say, other people would burn out.
Right, exactly. So now you have the next, you say you have a good relationship with the next one.
Oh, with Libra.
Libras, yeah.
Yes. Well, I also have a Libra moon, that soft Libra moon. So there's going to be a little bit of a bias there. Absolutely. But Libra rising, and what I find with people with Libra rising is there is this natural, very often they are, quite frankly, very attractive. There's a charm about them. They're social. Those to me are the social butterflies. They're very good. They can speak to everybody, great facilitators. The only thing I'm going to say with Libra rising sometimes is that they are relationship oriented. And they can, and I've always said this about Libra, it can be a little too over accommodating. They kind of enjoy, okay, you take charge and, make the decisions, and they enjoy that for a while, until after a while, it's just sort of like they can't stand it anymore. So that's the only, I say, pitfall with Libra rising, or Libra in general has to watch out for, is not stepping back and saying, here, take care of everything, or being so accommodating, because over time they tend to come to resent it.
They do. They're a cardinal air sign, and the air sign speaks to sort of the intellectual. I think a lot of Libras spend a lot of time, at least in Libra rising, spend a lot of time in their head thinking about things. When it comes to sort of the things about that is a problem sometimes, I've noticed myself, is that Libras sometimes have a hard time making up their mind. Just as we mentioned earlier with Geminis, there's sort of that dual quality there. While they make great judges and lawyers and everything else, because they have that ability to see both sides of the coin, what happens is that in that conundrum, they often don't know which side they may go to bed thinking the person's guilty and wake up and say they're not guilty. You know what I'm saying?
It's actually, Virgo is the quote, perfectionist of the zodiac. But with Libra and that quote, indecisiveness, it's actually a perfectionism issue. It's like, it's got to go down to the exact amount of grains of sand to make it perfectly balanced. Until it's perfectly balanced, it goes back and forth. And it's almost a fear at times, I think, of making the wrong decision.
Right, exactly. So there's always that, they vacillate. And that, but then by the same token, as a result of that ability to see both sides and trying to find equanimity, they make great diplomats, they make great judges, they make great lawyers, all those qualities where you need that sort of balance to be part of your agenda. They rise to the occasion very well. But you know what's interesting as well? Because you mentioned beauty earlier, I know probably 7 or 8, this is no exaggeration, or maybe probably even more if I go through my client base, of people who have a strong Libra presence who are involved in the beauty industry or do home decorating or something like that. They have a very strong visual aesthetic.
It's true. I can say the same thing for my clients as well. And if they are not in the fields professionally, then they are patronizing them. You know, if they're frequenting them. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's really interesting because, you go, I think if you walked into any beauty salon and you did a roll call of the people that were there, got their birthdays, you'd find a strong Libra component in almost every one of them. I think that's safe to say. So it's something to think of.
Yeah, and if it's not actually a strong Libra, it's a strong Venus.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, really cool. And this is amazing. So this is what we're talking about, how the first house and the ascendant can set the stage for the whole chart, and it really does. Next, we move on to Scorpio, one of my favorite signs. I've been involved with a lot of Scorpios in my life. There is an intensity to them, which is, there's this intense loyalty. You can see this, but you can also see, I was married to a person with a Scorpio rising, and they had a real physical, outwardly looking sensuality to them that was undeniable. It was almost like, wow, where did this come from? There's this sort of this magnetism that was there. It almost like a lure. It lured me, at least.
No, Scorpio rising, it has a lot of sex appeal. It's got a lot of sex appeal. It can be very seductive, even I feel when it's not even trying, quite frankly. And the other thing, though, about, I want to say Scorpio rising, taking that part, is that, again, it's a fixed sign. They, like Taurus, like Leo, like Aquarius, those, they hold their ground. The other thing, though, about Scorpio rising is that's the one rising sign that I do feel a lot of people, when they meet them, because there's such power. I mean, Scorpio is about power and transformation. And so on the ascendant, that comes across, and it can actually be a little bit intimidating to certain people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that they don't even know how much power they have sometimes. And they are because there's that very finely tuned intensity that comes across, that you mentioned, the power is there. And of course it's fixed power. So you're not going to win many arguments there either. Just because of the fact that they always, and they don't forget a damn thing. They don't forget any, they don't forget.
I'm glad you said it. Yeah.
They don't forget one thing that you did wrong. You'll hear about it for the rest of your life, or they keep track of it.
They're scorekeepers.
They're scorekeepers. Yeah, which always, drives me crazy, but whatever. I know somebody who keeps a laundry list of all the, the things I did wrong over the course of my relationship.
But they make up for it in other ways, so it's okay.
Make up for it in other ways, yeah. But there's an intense loyalty. There's the ability to dig deep. They go where no other sign goes. They're not afraid to dig under the covers and to find the dirt, which makes them to be great investigative reporters and stuff like that. They really have a good quality there.
They're in it or they're out of it. That's the one thing I find about Scorpio, whether it's the moon, whether it's the sun, whether it's the rising sign. There's no gray. There's no middle ground. It tends, because it is a sign that's extreme, right? Pluto is a planet that's one of the extreme planets. And that's why I say they're either, you always know where you stand with them, because either like they're with you or they're not.
Mm-hmm. And I like that because I think that's true for all the fixed signs, as you mentioned. But what it does is there's a certain gift in that, because sometimes I find myself trying to figure out the answer to a question, and I vacillate myself sometimes about a question. Do I or do I not? Should I not? With a Scorpio and with a Leo and a Taurus and a Aquarius, they know, and when their mind is made up, they very rarely vacillate from it.
Yeah. They're, like I say, and basically, but I do want to say Scorpio, I think, is a very good example of when they walk into a room, the type of person that can walk in and you can be intimidated, or you might think, oh, they're a little bit unapproachable. And then you get to know them and you see an entirely different side.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really there.
Very different from the next rising sign, which is Sagittarius.
Yeah, I know. Very different indeed.
Right? The very much, I always think of the sort of the maitre d' in the restaurant, really very outgoing, very optimistic, very upbeat. And they really, Sagittarius rising to me is life is life is a cabaret. Life is not to say a smorgasbord, but they enjoy life and they like to experience everything.
It's an adventure. They're very adventurous. Yeah. And it's why, you look at people who have that certain, and of course, there's also a very strong spiritual component to them too. We look at someone like Pope Francis. He's a Sagittarius, and there's a very strong sort of philosophical, spiritual component, religion, if for lack of a better word.
Right.
All fits in with that as well. They love travel. They love these big, lofty thoughts. And, they certainly do have a certain joie de vivre. And I think that comes from the ability to allow themselves to open their minds in other ways. So by traveling, when you travel, your mind is open all the time because you're seeing new things every day. When you read or study or educate, you're doing the same thing. That's a very much of a Sagittarius kind of a trait.
No, absolutely. It's about growth. It's about evolving.
Yeah.
And I do feel some signs more than others, but Sagittarius is certainly one of them. It's about the experience.
Yes, all about the experience. And that's why travel is such an important thing, because when you're traveling, you're immersed in a new country, a new culture, a new block of the city, or wherever you're traveling to. You're absorbing all that stuff. And then, of course, it's on and you're moving on to the next one. So it's very key that way. Now, the next one we're going to let you take charge of because you know it.
So Capricorn rising. So on the rising sign, people who have Capricorn rising, and I'm going to say more so than the sun sign in this respect, certainly, or the moon sign, Capricorn rising very much, I've used the word polish. They come across very often. There's a polish about them. I'm not going to say they're all classy, but there's definitely a polish. Tends to be reserved. They can seem, again, when you first meet them, they can be a little quiet. It's not that they're shy. There's a big difference. It's not like Cancer that can be a little bit of shy, but they watch. They keep a good eye of what's going on because, Capricorn, it is a calculating sign.
Mm-hmm. It is. And it's a fixed, it's a cardinal earth sign. So it's got that sense of being an initiator, but they sort of are the bedrock, the ground bedrock of the cardinal signs. And that fits their role. And of course we see that. And I like the idea of the polish. There's a certain, reserved is definitely the word I would use to it. And there's a certain steadfast, methodical quality to them, sort of a due diligence kind of person, very, of course, ruled by Saturn, very responsible. You'll get the job done with the Capricorn.
No, and they can be a little hard. They can have high expectations. I will say when it comes to other people, if you're working, I'm going to say for, Capricorn, and this I can say for myself, but certainly for the rising sign, it's like, they really expect you. You've got to stay late. Well, then just, stay late.
Right. But I think if I were an employer, I would hire a Capricorn employee because I know that they're going to do a good job. Typically, that's always the case. They're very reliable. That's that sort of steadfastness I love. It's you can rely on that old sea goat.
Gee, thanks. Yes, we are.
I know sea goat is not exactly the most glamorous thing, but I like the fact that you said polish. I think that's a much better term.
It is. It's polished.
Yeah, and I'm not sure the sea goat. I think the goat is a much more apt. The mountain goat, clinging to the cliffs, always climbing, is a great.
See, I always liked the sea goat because that tail sort of to me gave it like a little bit of maybe glamour, because otherwise there was this goat. Because a ram, it's like, oh, there's the ram, and it's like, oh, there's the goat. And I said, but the goat can walk up climb up almost a straight wall, but it just. I felt it didn't get the props it deserved, but I might be biased there.
Just a wee bit. I love the fact you started off with that polish. Oh, they're very polished. Yes, of course. What a great way to. The first word you choose is polished. They're very polished.
But they're cardinal signs.
Okay, we'll give you that. We'll give you that one. Yeah. No problem there. I agree with you. Next, we come to the Aquarius, which again is an air sign. You mentioned having a good time with air signs. I love Aquarius because I just love that gigantic view of the world that they have and the way they carry themselves. They can be a little chilly on the outside when you see them, just a little bit aloof, reserved.
They can be chilly even when you know them. It's not that they're cold. It's not that they're unfeeling, but Aquarius is a sign of detachment, and they are very good at separating themselves, from the emotions and not succumbing coming to the emotions. They look at things, objectively. They analyze things. And again, Aquarius and Scorpio, they're both extreme signs.
Yeah.
And so, but the Aquarius, it's also, look, we say, it's a sign of brilliance. It's a sign of madness. You don't know what to expect. The big thing is with them is whoever has Aquarius rising, there's always something different. There's always something distinct about how they go about things. And quite frankly, Aquarius rising very often, more than I think any other rising sign, that's the one that, honestly, they really don't care what other people think. They're much easier to shrug it off.
That's the fixed quality of them, and they're very secure in that. And I think that you mentioned that they, where they are and what they're thinking. I often think that their minds are elsewhere. They're almost looking at a much bigger picture sometimes, which is what they do. Some of our greatest presidents, two of them, Abraham Lincoln and Franklin Roosevelt, strong Aquarians, they could not have accomplished what they accomplished if they were worried about if they had if they were cancer or something like that. And that's not to say that they couldn't, but I think given the times that they were both faced with, they could not have accomplished that job had they been a different sign, I don't think.
I'll agree with you on that one, too.
Wow, she agrees with me again. Jeez.
Twice in one show. I don't know.
I'm glad we're recording. I'm glad we're recording this. I'm going to use this against you later.
And last but never least, Pisces.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Nothing fishy about them.
So here's, to me, with Pisces rising, and it's a gentle rising sign. Yeah. It really is. And that's the word that I would use for it.
Empathetic.
Yeah, they're very empathetic. They're very gentle. But when you think of the symbol, the glyph, the sign for Pisces, it's two fish, right? And they're going in opposite directions. And I was like, because Pisces, the fish, one it can soar to the heavens. Like it can go very high or it can go very low, negatively or positively. So it does depend on the chart, because there is that part of Pisces that can be a little bit manipulative, a little bit deceptive. It's a glamorous sign, though. And I find people of Pisces rising, if you want to talk about also a charisma, it's a very, it's more of an understated, I'm going to say, type of charisma, as opposed to Leo, which is, you just...
not as flamboyant. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And they also have a very... sort of a very strong artistic aesthetic. They have a very good eye, typically. They are very drawn to the arts. That's that sort of Venusian quality, that Venus quality that they carry with them. Also, there's that Neptunian quality of being a bit spacey sometimes as well, which can be illusion or delusion. We find that. But they also have I think they also have a very, like all water signs, have a very strong intuitive quality. There's no question about it.
No, I agree. Yeah. I agree.
And we started out this series with the first house, obviously, because it's the first. And we're going to be doing them as we see them. And we're going to do the angles, and then we'll do the cadence, and then we'll do the succeedance, which will be we'll start out with the cardinals, and then we'll do the fixed, and then we'll do the mutables as we go through around the whole wheel, talking about the relationship. But let's talk a little bit about the relationship to the self.
Okay.
And how do we look at that? How does that look? When we think about our relationship to ourselves, and the characteristics of the sign are reflected in how we view ourselves as well. And I think that comes through in the first house very strongly. I can speak to that as a Virgo because I am very self-critical sometimes about myself, which is a difficult thing to deal with sometimes, but also can be very helpful because you push yourself to do better. There's that perfectionist quality you spoke of earlier. As a Gemini rising, how do you think that manifests in yourself?
I think for me, it has to do with, I'm going to say, sort of what I value to some degree, because in the first house, I'm going to say what's important to me. And so Geminis are a curious sign, right? It's it likes intellectual stimulation. And so when I think of my life, and I could say, I'm Capricorn, I'm an achiever, but the knowledge, the information, the researching, that's been a big part of my life. And in terms of my relationship, even with myself, I've spent a lot of time, maybe too much time, questioning, even for myself, trying to figure things out, whatever it is going on in my life. I've spent a lot of time, I'm going to say, researching, analyzing, and I will say sometimes trying to improve it, of course. But that's what I would think with the Gemini rising for me. Yeah.
So I think what the point we're making is that all the characteristics that we mentioned, we do see them in the rising sign manifested that way. And the first house is more than just the ascendant. The ascendant sort of sets the ball in motion and dictates the chart. But there's more to it than that. The first house is also sort of your inner ego and other qualities. And planets that land there are going to lend their colors and their character to that person at the same way. So you have planets in the first house are going to have a certain distinct weight to those people, more so weight than to those who don't have planets in the first house, even though they are the ascendant.
Planets in the first house can very much modify, I'm going to say, the ascendant, or even sort of cover it a little bit. Because one thing I know when I meet people, and of course, this is my lifestyle, and I'll be talking, and I've always said this, I can never guess a sun sign. We'll never guess a sun sign. I usually pick up on the ascendant.
Yeah.
And those qualities that you mentioned, and I just want to say that the fixed quality, the cardinal energy, the mutable energy, it's usually very easy for me to narrow. If you're very familiar with those energies, you can narrow it down and say, is this person a fixed type of an energy? Are they that initiating type? Or like I say, that easygoing, mutable type.
Yeah. And I always come back to, I think that's a very good point. I love that. And I come back to the idea, I oftentimes can pick up on the element of the sign too, sometimes when I meet somebody, because there's a certain quality there as well.
No, it's interesting. It's just very interesting because, like I say, I usually don't pick up on the sign, but it starts for me, I'm going to say, with a quality. And from there in my mind is going as I'm speaking to them. And then I sort of narrow it down, and I might narrow it down to the sign and say, okay, definitely not a Leo, doesn't have that, that charisma. Or if they're in the cardinal sign, I can get that initiation. But if it's not in my face, well, then it's not Aries or Capricorn.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that's interesting about being a human being, having been one for a while, is the ability to we, unlike other species, have the ability to think about ourselves in ways that I don't think dogs sit around and say, "Gee, what am I doing today?" Or how I don't think they have panic attacks. I don't think that they have sessions of self-doubt or anything like that. But as human beings, we are always in that state of looking at ourselves and wondering, because we have this relationship of who we are versus who we think we are looking in the outside, which is sort of the dynamic that we're talking about, which are epitomized by the first house.
Yeah, because the first house is what people are seeing, what they're meeting, right? When they meet us, they're seeing mostly that first house. You've got to get to know the person before that rest of the chart comes into play. Yeah,
it's just, and it's really, the ability to self-analyze is it can be a great thing, but it can also be a hard thing as well, especially depending upon the sign that you're in. Largely because, we are unique in that respect. And that's why I think it's unusual. But the first house has a lot of things that it applies to. There's a whole set there's pages and pages of descriptors for the first house and what it does. And, anything from, obviously yourself and things like that. But, the way you carry yourself is all described in that, sort of the way your demeanor. We mentioned this mask that you wear, I think is a very apropos. I always think of it as the costume we wear. And, like going back to the theater or wherever, if you see somebody walk out in the king's costume or queen's costume, you know what they are. And that's sort of the metaphor for what I think the first house does for the person.
Now, and if you think of celebrities, when we see celebrities or politicians or whoever they are, and they're out there and there's a press conference or, they're making some statement, they're walking the red carpet, what are you seeing? I always think of that because really you're seeing that first house. You're seeing that first house.
Yeah, that's where it really comes true. That's why it's so important to understand the value of the first house and how that can be colored by the planets that reside there. So here's a good example. I'll use myself as a guinea pig here. I've got Saturn in the first house, which is I'm going to phrase it to my benefit, so just be prepared for that. I think that has made me a very responsible person. And I don't know if I could have gotten this far in my life had I not had that Saturn there, because the Saturn has always kept my feet to the fire, made me do the right thing.
Saturn in the first house can be very grounding.
It can also be a challenge, but
it can be a challenge, absolutely, but it can also be very grounding. It can force you to, I would say, to commit to things, to define things. So I'm just going to say, as with Aries energy, for example, and this go get it, and this perhaps impulsiveness or thinking before, acting, that Capricorn energy absolutely is very helpful and can make it a difference. And that's why, when we look at the chart as a whole, sometimes you've got that Saturn in the first house because, you needed it. You needed it in this lifetime.
In some ways, you think about the way when you look back at your life and you see the way events unfolded, you think about, wow, I had this Saturn in the first house, and yet I was handed a certain duty I had to complete.
That's right.
I couldn't have done that had I not had that. But the reason I got that duty was because I had that quality in some way.
No.
So we have to, we've been talking for a while. So we're just reintroducing the show, and we've been away for a while. Deborah and I used to do this before, and we're back again. We're going to do this as our own entity. So we're going to be He Says, She Says Astrology. We're going to be out here with a podcast every week, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
And I got to make sure I got that out of you.
Yes, we are. No, I'm a Capricorn. I'm committing.
Wow. I got that on tape too. Okay, good. Good for you. And so look for us. We're going to be on Facebook. We're going to be on Twitter. We're not going to have a website because we don't really need one. We think we're just going to have this. We're going to be up on iTunes eventually. And
yes.
This is a bold new step for two cardinal signs, putting our feet back in the water. And
absolutely
starting all over again. We got a lot of cardinality. I've got 7 signs in cardinal planets. 7 planets in cardinal signs.
Oh my God! Really?
That explains a lot, doesn't it?
I should know that. Yeah. See, I only have 2: the sun and the moon.
Well, that's enough. Minor detail. But anyway, thanks for listening. And
we will be back in a week.
We'll be back in a week. And it's He Says, She Says Astrology. I'm Chris Flisher.
I'm Deborah Ann Clement.
And here we are, and welcome us back. We're happy to be back. It's been a long time gone, but we're back. Thanks for listening to He Says, She Says Astrology podcast. For more information or to schedule a private or personal reading by either Chris Flisher or Deborah Clement, visit chrisflisher.com, turningofthewheel.com, or deborahclementastrologer.com, and subscribe for more great podcasts in the future.